Okay, well, I appreciate that we don't want to, a year later, as you say, go back and change the way that those administrative penalties are distributed. But I actually think that in this case, our appearance with the public in imposing more administrative penalties and having this perception that we have self-interest in imposing them, I think that trumps that. I would really like to see the fines distributed in some other way, just because of that, just because I don't like the perception. But I thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Bosworth, I think you had response to a couple of Mr. Obernolte's
Well,
questions.
I just on this point, I just want to clarify that the Department of Fish and Wildlife is funded from a myriad of funds, and just because there's increased penalties in one year versus another year does not mean that they have authority to spend those monies. Every year in budget development in the late summer, early fall, departments bring forward budget change proposals to augment staffing. That is really where that determination is made. And so it has really no direct connection at all about what monies they have to expend with what penalties are coming in any given year. Of course, they're going into special funds, and then we look at those funds and understand those fund balances so we can understand what ongoing resources, because usually in the case of Department of Fish and Wildlife, it's state support. State support is an ongoing endeavor, and so we look closely at those funds and those fund balances, but that is a very independent analysis, very far removed from the penalty issuance, I will just say.
I appreciate that, and I agree with what you just said, but my chief concern is a problem of perception with the public.
Yeah.
And I think about it from the point of view of maybe a property owner who's gotten one of these administrative penalties, and I would not want them to think that the reason why they got that is because we're trying to fund the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So the problem is one of perception, not of one of budgeting that you just raised.
Yeah,
so that's my concern.
And thank you for raising it. And my only final thought is I appreciate you taking the time to think about each of these three sections, but they're within the context of what is almost entirely a financial package to help disadvantaged communities, people, fish and wildlife. And these are three small pieces within that overall package. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Mr. Patterson and Mr. Gordon have questions.
Mr. Chairman, we will be hearing from people from the general public.
Yes,
others,
as soon as our questions are finished.
Good, and I might reserve some questions.
Sure.
For after that. A couple of quick points. I don't notice a sunset in here. Why should these extraordinary and unusual powers not be sunsetted?
Well, I'm not sure I personally would describe them as unusual or extraordinary, but I agree that we're in a remarkable time relative to drought. I am not sure how, for example, in Section 2, one would both achieve the proposed directive to promulgate regulations and then have spent that time and energy and shortly turn around, say in 2 years, have the whole thing sunsetted. So some of the feedback and questions I've heard seem at opposite odds. If the administrative penalty concern is driven mostly by whether there's fair due process, my answer is make the department be transparent, go through the Office of Administrative Law, follow the Administrative Procedure Act, and propose a very detailed written procedure for use of them.
I guess when and if the drought breaks, shouldn't these authorities be rescinded? These are, as I understand it, I'll use it, we are in an extraordinary period of time under extraordinary circumstances, which are granting your department some additional and deeper reach. And the undercurrent rationale is the current drought. And all I'm asking is if, God help us, 3 or 4 years from now, the drought breaks, shouldn't these extraordinary powers be undone. If the emergency disappears, shouldn't the emergency provisions sunset?
I personally don't think so, but I understand that perspective.
So once, okay, I'll. The point being, if it's an emergency for the purpose of mitigating a drought, the drought does end, and we have flows in our systems, and we're healing ourselves. What is the point of continuing a particularly new kind of authority that has reaches that are and stipulations that our farm community and our forest community find objectionable? It's the point for the reason to undo something if the emergency goes away.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon and then Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Just a comment. I actually want to associate myself with comments made by my colleague, Mr. Patterson. I know we're here for an informational hearing. We're not going to be able to take action, but my preference would be to see these powers on a time-limited basis. And I don't know whether we'll have the opportunity to consider that at some point, but again, I do think that we're taking extraordinary actions in light of the drought, and perhaps if it is extraordinary, we should put a sunset on those and revisit to see whether they continue to be necessary at some future point. I struggle with, as I think about this, you know, kind of a sunset would you put on, because I've got no clue how long we're going to be in this current condition. I accept that we may need to do some of these things immediately, but my preference would be would have been to have some sunset at some point. So, just a comment. Thank you.
If I might, both Mr. Patterson and Mr. Gordon, apart from the question of sunset, which I understand the issue, whether required or not, I think our department has a strong interest in reporting back to you on some defined time frame how we might be using these authorities. I have found that very useful. We just submitted to you our first annual report on the only other administrative penalties you've ever given us around marijuana. And at a minimum, I think the department voluntarily, if not required, would welcome the ability to come back and report to you how these may have been used and whether they achieved their intended effect.
So, Director Bonham, let me take you up on that offer and ask you to come back to us with a proposal as to how you will report back on a regular basis on implementation and how these changes are working out. Mr. Williams.
Well, I think I have a strong answer of why we should not rescind these powers with a sunset date at a later date. It is unlikely that the state of California will ever have enough water for long enough to tolerate people illegally diverting water that belongs to other people. And to me, it sounds a little incredulous that we would lead ourselves to believe that we will ever have enough water to tolerate people illegally diverting water that belongs to someone else. And I, for one, want the enforcement mechanisms necessary to prevent that. When someone takes someone else's property right, they rely on the state to deal with that. And this is the best tools that we have to do that.
And I'll just chime in with a couple of quick comments. I think that these three provisions are overdue, frankly, and the drought is precipitating these changes, but they are not particularly far-reaching and are, I think, for folks who are acting appropriately and utilizing water in the way that the current law requires, the provisions are benign. And I do understand the concerns that are being voiced this morning, and I hope that over time, with the reports that are going to be coming back now from the department, that we will see that they are having little impact with respect to the concerns, but a great impact in terms of addressing the very specific issues like illegal diversion, like marijuana cultivation, and the like, the very specific things that these measures are targeted at. So we do want to hear from the Ms. Bosler?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one other item that I failed to mention in my opening remarks that's in the budget bill that's really unrelated to drought, and I think people have had some questions about it, so I just want to clarify what that is.
Please, go ahead.
There is a ratification of a side letter for Bargaining Unit 19. These are our health and mental health professionals, many of whom work in our state prisons. And this is a side letter that was agreed upon with the union this past October. A letter notifying the legislature, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee was sent then, and the Joint Legislative Budget Committee at that time also approved the side letter, but we couldn't go forward implementing that until there was an appropriation by the legislature. The side letter is costing about $647,000 in the budget year. Just the details related to it, and in the interim, we have not implemented this side letter. And it was really something that was brought by the Coleman lawsuit, which under those federal lawsuits that our state prisons are under, federal courts had ordered that mental health professionals be at every cell extraction that occurs in the state prisons. So we were able to reach negotiation with the bargaining unit to provide coverage, because these things often do not happen in normal working hours. And so we reached agreement with the unit to provide coverage on a 24-hour basis to be on call. But in the interim, because we haven't been able to implement that, we've had to require supervisors to be on call for 24/7, and this has caused a lot of hardships. These are very hard to recruit and retain positions in our state prisons, and so we wanted to take the earliest opportunity to implement that side letter to ease the administration of our state prisons and the compliance with the federal lawsuit. So I just wanted to clarify that piece.
Thank you. And I just noticed a number of members of the Conservation Court just walked in behind you. Could you remind us of the unique provision that's being proposed that will hopefully facilitate some additional responsibilities for the Conservation Corps, if feasible?
Yes, absolutely. So starting with Proposition 1, the water bond, there's a unique provision in that really points to the utilization of Corps members wherever possible in projects funded by Proposition 1. That language is repeated in our trailer bill that's before you today, SB 76, because we really want to give the California Conservation Corps, which provides so many great opportunities for many youth in the state, opportunities to work on meaningful projects that are also really critical to responding to the drought that's facing the state. So,
thank you for that. Well, why don't we proceed with the public hearing now? Are there members of the public who would like to address us?
Good morning. Noelle Kramers with the California Farm Bureau Federation. I want to start by expressing my appreciation to the administration for taking this issue on. This is an extraordinary drought. We need to take action and help those in communities that have limited access to water. So I want to sort of preface my comments by saying that our concerns are very specific to the provisions within the Fish and Game Code, not to the bills in general. On the administrative civil penalties, we have long-standing concern about giving administrative civil penalty authority to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, but specifically on providing them administrative civil Penalty Authority 2, Section 5901, there are tens of thousands of lawfully constructed bridges, culverts, and reservoirs throughout California. There's not a clear definition of what impediment to fish passage is. So all of those lawfully constructed structures, the owners could be at risk of having a civil penalty because they may impede fish passage even though they were lawfully permitted and constructed. We think that a better approach would be, instead of creating penalties, is to simplify the permitting system to make upgrades to those facilities, simplifying the process, providing funds to focus on reducing impediments to fish passage rather than coming after people. Essentially, we would support the carrot approach rather than the stick approach. We also have concerns that these are pretty significant changes being made in an extraordinary situation, and I would like to follow up on the conversation and appreciate the comments and questions asked about whether or not this should be limited. I mean, we would prefer that the changes not be made, but we have significant concerns about the long-term implications of this if it's targeted specifically at the drought, but then used much beyond that. We also absolutely have concerns about illegal theft of water. Our members are impacted by that just as Fish and Wildlife are, and we want to see theft of water addressed. We think that that's appropriately done at the State Water Board. They currently have that authority. We understand the fact that the wardens and other Department of Fish and Wildlife employees are out on the ground and may see things that the State Water Board does not see. And so we think it's appropriate for the department to work with the State Board and ask the State Board to issue complaints if the department sees something, and have the department be a party to that complaint, but ultimately have the State Board be the one issuing the complaint rather than the department. So those are our major concerns with the provisions included. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Bloom. Paul Mason on behalf of Pacific Forest Trust, and I just wanted to express our support for the trailer bill. In particular, I think that the additional authorities to address illegal diversions related to marijuana production are long overdue and rather modest. I think that Assemblymember Williams said it pretty well, that when you have these outlaws out there who are not even trying to comply with any of the laws, who are stealing water, causing harm to fish and wildlife, it is essential that we have more tools and more people addressing those impacts. And I mean, frankly, I think that Director Bonham both did a very good job explaining the provisions, but also maybe deserves the award for understatement in suggesting that the State Water Board has more than enough on their plate right now to think that it's realistic to look to them to continue to handle all enforcement actions that their department is running across. And it's entirely reasonable when you have these situations that are causing harm to fish and wildlife public trust resources for the department to have the authority to take action and to assess some penalties there. So we're very supportive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith Dunn, Mr. Chairman, here on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies. I wanted to applaud the legislature and the administration for taking action and doing what we can to address the water needs of our communities, specifically by accelerating some of the revenues that the voters have passed to try and do some additional water recycling, specifically the $267 million from Prop 1 fund we think is critical to get into the local agencies so they can start doing some of the recycling programs to make do with the water systems that they have until we get a storage or some additional rain that's going to change that. We also would like to applaud the decision to expedite the 1E funding that's been kind of around for a while to get that money out in the streets to do some flood protection. Not only is that going to help stimulate the economy by creating some jobs, but it's also going to do a lot to manage and protect some of the wildlife in the Delta as well as the communities that rely upon those for their communities for their flood protection. So good job. We applaud the effort and thank you.
Chair and members, Kathy Mossberg representing the California Association of Food Banks. We certainly want to thank the administration for continuing their inclusion of emergency food for those impacted by the drought and expanding those counties that would be included in this. And thank you. Support the bill.
I'm Helen Roth-Dowden from, I represent Nexus E-Water, which is an on-site water recycling company. California has recently passed new building standards that allow on-site water recycling, and we applaud the governor and the legislature for meeting some of the drought needs, and we're hoping that these new water efficiency projects, in this case it will, the Nexus E-Water system and many of these systems will lower household use by about 50% by using shower and bath and laundry water for landscape purposes. Thanks.
Good morning. Mike Janai from Humboldt Redwood Company and Mendocino Redwood Company. I appreciate very much the conversation that has ensued this morning. I asked Director Bonham to clarify this issue of the expanse of what they are proposing. He was quite clear in his comments. I would ask you members to look at the wording, current wording, and when you deliberate and vote on this, make sure that the wording is very clear, because as it stands right now, I believe that the scope of what is being talked about in terms of impediments to water flow and fish passage could extend way up into our watersheds. We are the ones that are managing those watersheds for the fish. We've spent millions of dollars on upgrades of our facilities to provide fish passage. When we're faced with trying to get that work done over a period of time, if we've got people coming out, looking at what we're doing, we've worked very closely with the department heretofore. I just want to make sure that this new law and also regulations that will come into play clearly state that this will be for the fish, not for upslope facilities that we have commonly on our forested landscapes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, very briefly, Richard Harris, the Nossman firm, on behalf of Water Reuse California, very, very appreciative of your efforts to expedite the funding. The State Water Board's doing a great job of getting their guidelines out. Member agencies are already submitting projects and working on trying to get that money out the door and build projects to recycle water. I think this is a great idea. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members. Pablo Garza with the Nature Conservancy, and we're here in support of both the appropriations bill and the trailer bill. With this fourth year of drought, we all know it's having adverse impacts on our economy, on people, and fish and wildlife across the state. We're particularly focused on the fish and wildlife provisions and the much-needed actions to monitor impacts, take emergency actions to save many species that are on the brink of extinction. But there's over 9 agencies getting funding, and I think it will provide much needed relief across the board. On the trailer bill, we're also supportive of the fish and wildlife provisions, and I think the discussion really hashed out all the issues here this morning. But I think, in our view, this is simply a clarification or improvement on existing law. This is not broad new authority. To get people in trouble. I think I think Assemblymember Williams said it well. This diverting water illegally is already not supposed to happen, and just simply clarifies and gives the department some new tools to enforce against those actions. And I think it's good public policy, and perhaps the drought has brought these limitations into focus, and it's why we're acting now. But I think these are, I would argue they should not be sunsetted. They're important changes that should endure. So thank you for your time.
Mr. Chair and members, Mark Fenstermaker here on behalf of the Sonoma County Water Agency, very much in support of the package here before us. In particular, the provisions for the water conservation funding that is going to go to the CalConserve program. Our agency has worked with the town of Windsor on their pay-as-you-save program, have found tremendous results both in water savings as well as greenhouse gas reduction. So we're big fans of that program, and they're very thankful that we're putting some funding towards this. Thank you.
Chair, members of the committee, director, my name is Hezekiah Allen, Executive Director of the Emerald Growers Association, a statewide trade association of medical cannabis farmers. We looked at this one pretty carefully, and in the end, we are here to support the provisions to the Fish and Game Code. We do share the concerns expressed by CalForest and by the Farm Bureau. We have an additional concern, which is the creation of a double standard between industries, and we would like to talk about whether illegal diversion specifically for cannabis cultivation is worse than illegal cultivation for any other industry. However, at the end of the day, the drought is extraordinary. We do want to be part of the solution, and we hope to work in partnership with all of you to protect the waters and the wildlife of the state in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, this is an informational hearing, and I'd like to ask Ms. Bossler or Mr. Bonham, if you want to respond to any of the comments that you've heard from the public or have any other remarks that you'd like to make, and then we'll take one more pass on the dice here for questions or comments. And
none?
No? All right. Thank you. Mr. Williams, I think you mentioned you.
I just wanted to connect the dots because I spent some time as head of a joint powers agency on water to connect the dots of why the diversions and fish impediments directly translate to people having less water resources. And the fact is that these diversions that take place, these illegal diversions, can sometimes take someone else's property right? Because if those illegal diversions create less stream flow, that stream flow in that watershed is then no longer high enough for the criteria for downstream water users to have the ability to get the water that they expect and that their communities need. The impediments also is about water for people, because the more of those the less of those impediments, those illegal impediments that are in place, the more those fish species recover, the more water we can use for other things and still comply with federal endangered species law. So that's just really important. And when we wanted to have more water availability for our communities, one of the best things that we could do was spend money on getting rid of fish impediments, because then we could have more water and still comply with federal law. And so to me, this isn't just about fish. It's about people getting water. And we should not be tolerating, not now and not ever, illegal diversions of water that cause communities to have less water availability. And the only folks who have folks on the ground out there to really be able to enforce that is the Department of Fish and Game. So I support this legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Obernolte?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a question for the Department of Finance. So a week ago, when we were talking about the implementation of Prop 1 and the appropriation of that money, the Department of the Legislative Analyst's Office offered some reporting and accountability language that they recommended that you seemed like you were amenable to. And so I was a little surprised to not see that same language in SB 75, the trailer bill. Can you comment on that, please?
Yes, so I am familiar with the language that was proposed that day in the subcommittee, and it is something that we absolutely want to continue to talk about and would be supportive in concept going forward. So we will continue. This is not the end of the drought conversation. We'll continue to work on that and may revise and post and hope to get to a conclusion on some accountability language that everyone can agree to.
Great. So. Thank you very much.
Mr. Patterson?
My understanding is we're seeing this Thursday.
On the Assembly floor, yes.
On the Assembly floor
procedurally, the Senate, my understanding is the Senate will be hearing it today, and tomorrow the Assembly.
So that we should be anticipating that accountability language when we see it on the floor.
I think the accountability language would be something that we would continue to discuss in May, and then would be part of a budget package that would be passed in June.
Okay. One other comment about
when the vast majority of the other Prop 1 monies are appropriated.
Finance people here that were here. You sit right there. I just wanted to let you know I appreciate the fact that the 5-year encumbrance is incorporated here. That was an area we discussed. I think it made some good sense, and I wanted you to know I appreciate the fact that that language is here, and wanted to say thank you.
Well, I think that brings our hearing to a conclusion. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has participated in the negotiations, but more importantly in the conversations that have taken place around these measures that we anticipate will be passed and signed into law, hopefully this week. So thank you to each and every one of you who participated in the discussions. Again, this is not a discussion that ends today or even with the passage of these measures. This is a discussion that will be ongoing in our budget package that comes to us through the May revise and then through the June adoption of this year's budget. But next year's budget is sure to consider these issues once again as we anticipate the drought conditions will continue on. Mr. Patterson.
Just wanted to make sure I asked the question. Is it your intention to incorporate any of the suggestions or recommendations and the amendments from the Farm Bureau into this bill?
Give me 1 second to think through what's in the Farm Bureau letter. I believe that the department has proposed language that's responsive to the underlying concerns, but we look forward to suggesting additional reporting language that could show you and others how we're implementing these 3 discrete authorities.
Right now, I think some of our analysis, when we look at it on the floor, may have an oppose unless amended. I'd like to ask if we could, with Farm Bureau and with the forest folks, work through some of this so that we don't have that choice on the floor, that we actually have some solutions to it. And I would encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That brings our meeting to a close. Thank you all.